Welcome back, class 7. I hope you are doing great. Today we are here to discuss the remaining portion of the chapter, the Mughal Empire. Last week I gave you, or the last day I gave you a brief introduction about the origin of the Mughals, why they are called the Mughal, their ancestral history. Then we talked about their process or the system of succession. Then we have seen about their emperors, about the emperors and their history, about their annexations also. Today we will look into a little more detail and we will see how they were able to manage such a huge empire and how they were able to establish a strong policy. Alright, so without wasting any time, let's get started. Today we will first see that they had the system of or the people called Mansabdars and Jagirdars. So their huge empire was subdivided into several provinces for the ease of governing it in a proper way. So they had the empire expanded to encompass the different regions of the Mughal recruited diverse bodies of people. From a small nucleus of Turkish noble, they expanded to include Iranians, Indians, Muslims, Afghans, Rajput, Marathas and other groups. Those who joined Mughal service were enrolled as Mansabdars. So people of different caste, religion and people from different provinces joined the Mughal Empire who were called the Mansabdars. The term referred to an individual who holds a mansab. What is a mansab? It means a rank or position. It was a grading system used by the Mughals to fix the rank, salary and military responsibilities. Rank and salary were determined by a numeric value called Zat. The higher the Zat, the more prestigious was the noble's position in the court and the larger the salary. So it's just like the government services, or you may say in nowadays the civil service, just like the civil services, they also had this system of mansab, all right, where the people used to join their service or the government of official jobs, and they were recruited on the basis of their they had their different position, different authority. The Mansabdar's military responsibilities required him to maintain a specified number of Sawar or cavalrymen. Okay, so the Mansabdars brought this cavalrymen for review, got them registered, their horses branded, and they received money to pay them the salary. Mansabdars received their salaries as revenue assignments called Jagir, which were somewhat like the Iktas. But unlike Iktas, most Mansabdars did not actually reside in or administer their Jagirs. They only had rights to the revenue of their assignments, which was enrolled for them by their servants, while the Mansabdar themselves served in some other parts of the country. So they again had their servants who used to actually collect the revenue. Their salaries were in terms of the revenue, and which used to get collected by the servants of these mansabs. In Akbar's reign, these Jagirs were carefully assessed so that the revenues were roughly equal to the salary of the Mansabdar. In Aurangzeb's time, there was no longer the case, and the individual revenue collected was often less than the granted slum. Okay, so there was a huge increase in the number of the Mansabdars, which meant a long wait before they received a Jagir. These and other factors created a shortage in the number of Jagirs. As a result, many Jagirdars they tried to extract as much revenue as possible while they had a Jagir. Aurangzeb was unable to control this situation, thus the treasury had suffered a lot. So again, when they had introduced this system has again some flaws. Okay, so to govern such huge provinces, they had relied on these people, but these people again had again had few shortcomings. All right, so but it is considered as one of the major political steps to control the different, or to earn the different revenues from the different plots. Now we are coming to the zabat and the zamindars. The main source of income available to Mughal rulers was the tax on the produce of the peasantry. So, peasants were very, very much in vogue at that point of time also, because India was always an agricultural country. So, vast land for agriculture were, available. In most places, peasants paid taxes through the rural elites. These elites, that is the headman or the local chieftain. The Mughal used one term, zamindars, to describe all the intermediaries, whether they were local headmen or the villagers or the powerful chieftains. Now, the Akbar's revenue minister Todarmal carried out a careful survey of the crop yield. So he was the revenue minister. It was his responsibility to measure all the land, to grant the revenue, and to see whether they are giving proper taxes or not. So he carried out one survey of the crop yield, prices, and the areas cultivated for a period of 10 years. 1570 to 1580. On the basis of the data, the tax was collected on each crop in cash. Each province was divided into revenue circle, and this own schedule of revenue rates for individual crop. This revenue system was known as zabat. So again, they had fixed some proportion, like nowadays the central government decide how much tax is to be collected from whom. Okay, depending on the income of the individual, the tax is calculated. Similarly, Todarmal, who was the revenue minister in Akbar's court, he surveyed the cultivated land for 10 years and he decided on a revenue system which was known as the zabat. It was prevalent in those areas where the Mughal administrators could survey the land and keep very careful accounts. But it was not this was not possible in provinces such as Gujarat and Bengal. Okay, in these two states, these were not possible. In some areas, the zamindars exercised a great deal of power. The exploitation by the Mughal administrators could drive them to rebellion. Sometimes the zamindars and the peasants of the same caste allied in rebelling against the Mughal authority. These peasants revolted, challenged the stability of the Mughal Empire from the end of the 17th century. So it has also seen that the people who actually owned the different land, or who actually worked under the very big zamindars, they again revolted against the Mughal authority towards the end of the 17th century. That means they did not like the this particular revenue system, or they had some other suggestions. So by the end of 17th century, when Aurangzeb was ruling, it was seen that they often came out with different rebellions along with their zamindars. All right, okay. Akbarnama and Aini Akbari, this short note you will go through. Okay, so Akbar, what is it? Akbar ordered one of his close friends and the courtiers, Abul Fazl was a great poet, okay, to write a history of his reign. Abul Fazl wrote a 3-volume history of Akbar's reign and titled it Akbarnama. The first volume dealt with Akbar's ancestors, and the second volume recorded the events of Akbar's reign. The third volume is the Aini Akbari. It deals with its administration, household, army, and the revenues and the geography of his empire. The most interesting aspect of the Aini Akbari is its rich statistical details about the things as diverse as crop, yields, prices, wages, and revenues. So, children, from the very beginning, starting from the ancient period. If we look into the course of history, we will see that it was either the travelers or the ambassadors or the court poets who used to write about the reign of the different empires. So from their writing history, from these accounts, we get to learn a lot. We get to learn in detail about that specific empire. Just like Chanakya or Kautilya had written in volume about the Mauryan Empire. So from his account we get to know a lot about its administration, political system, its economy, about the different annexations done by both Chandragupta Maurya and his grandson, the great Ashoka. So this also during the Mughal period, this Abul Fazl was one of the 9 gems in Akbar's court who wrote in detail in his volume called Akbarnama, and later in Aini Akbari, where he had mentioned in detail about its different features as diverse as starting from the crops till the revenues. Now we will see a close look into the Akbar's policy. The broad features of administration were laid down by Akbar and were elaborately discussed by Abul Fazl in his book Akbarnama, in particular in its last volume Aini Akbari. So what did he say, or what did he write there? He wrote that the empire was divided into provinces called Subas, governed by a Subedar who carried out both political and military functions. Each province had a financial officer or Diwan. For the maintenance of peace and order in his province, the Subedar was supported by different officials as the military paymaster, who was called generally Bakshi, the minister in charge of religious and charitable patronage, who was called Sadar, military commanders or called Fauzdars, and the town police commander called Kotwal. So a province was divided into several sections, and to run a province without any trouble or to have a very organized system of government, these people were appointed fruitfully to look after the different sections of the society. Akbar's noble commanded a large army and had access to the large amounts of revenue. They were loyal to the empire, functioned efficiently by the end of the 17th century. Many nobles had built independent networks of their own. Their loyalties to the empire were weakened by their own self-interest. We will see that as the empire was so big, it was not possible for all the people to look into the nitty-gritty of the provinces. So sometimes the people who were actually in charge of the several important things, they started looking for their own interests. So the empire started weakening. Akbar was at Fatehpur Sikri during the 1570s, and he started discussions on religion with the ulemas, Brahmanas, Jesuit priests who were the Roman Catholics, and the Zoroastrians. These discussions took place in the Ibadat Khana. So I told you before that Akbar was a king who was so liberal with his views. He was very open-minded and he accepted all kinds of religious discussions. So he built this Ibadat Khana where he used to have a discussion about the different religions. He was interested in the religion and the social customs of different people. Akbar's interaction with people of different faith made him realize that religious scholars who emphasized ritual and dogma were often bigots. Their teachings created divisions and disharmony amongst his subjects. This eventually actually led Akbar to the idea of Sul-e-Kul, or the universal peace. So, why Akbar was called one of the greatest Mughal emperor? It is one of the reasons behind his flourishing empire. He was not as rigid as Aurangzeb was, and he was much, open to suggestions. He was much broad minded, and he accepted all the differences in every religion, and he tried to make idea or had given the idea of Sulikul, or the universal peace. The idea of tolerance did not discriminate between the people of different religions in his realm. Instead, it focused on a system of ethics, honesty, justice, peace that was universally acceptable or applicable. Abul Fazl helped Akbar in framing a vision of governance around his idea of Sulikul. He was Abul Fazl, as you know, we have discussed one of his 9 gems. His principle of governance was followed by Jahangir and Shah Jahan as well. So the later Mughals, after Akbar, Jahangir and Shah Jahan also followed the same system of governance, just following Akbar. Now we will see the Mughal Empire in the 17th century and after. So towards the end of the Mughal Empire, what happened? The administrative and military efficiency of the Mughal Empire led to a great economic and commercial prosperity. It is very evident from the annexations of the different territories, or the very planned system that Akbar and the early Mughals had established. International travelers described it as the fabled land of wealth. So much of revenue they gathered, okay? But these same visitors were also appalled to the state of poverty that existed side by side by the greatest opulence. The inequalities were glaring. Documents from the 12th century, year of the Shah Jahan reign, inform us that the highest ranking Mansabdars were only 445 in number out of a total of 8,000. The smaller number, a mere 5.6% of the total of the Mansabdars, received 61.5% of the total estimated revenue of the empire as salaries for themselves and for the troopers. The Mughal emperors and their Mansabdars spent a great deal of their income on salaries and goods. This expenditure benefited the artisans and peasantry who supported them with goods and produce. But the scale of revenue collection left very little for investment in the hands of the primary producers, the peasant and the artisan. The poorest among them lived from hand to mouth, and they could hardly consider investing in additional resources, tools and supplies to increase productivity. The wealthier peasantry and the artisanal group, the merchants and the bankers, profited in this economic world. So you know what happened towards the end? There was a chaos. The system was collapsing. People were not taking interest. They were actually only looking for their own interests. So suddenly the peasantry started suffering, and the Mansabdars got decreased in number, and very few of them actually started getting the revenue. So the wealthier peasantry and the artisan group, the merchants and bankers, profited in the economic world, not the poor peasants. The enormous wealth and resources commanded by the Mughal elite made them an extremely powerful group of people in the late 17th century. As the authority of the Mughal emperor slowly declined, these servants emerged as powerful centers of power in the regions. They constituted new dynasties and held command of provinces like Hyderabad and Awadh. Although they continued to recognize the Mughal emperor in Delhi as their master, by the 18th century the provinces of the empire had controlled their independent political identities. So what happened actually towards the end, we will see that some people got rich or got money in their hands so much that they started recognizing themselves as separate entities, though they used to feel that their people are sitting in Delhi as the Mughal king, but they had their separate identity till then, and they were basically based on Awadh. Awadh and few in Hyderabad or in Awadh. So they had gathered so much of wealth that they had their own identity, and they forgot to see the other interest of the other people. All right, so this is how the empire started declining, and also because the later Mughals were not as efficient as the early Mughals. All right, children. So that was all about the huge, glorious period of Indian history, Indian medieval history, which is the Mughal Empire. And we have seen how the people were organized, how beautifully they, had run the government. They tried their best to pull up all the sectors of the economy, starting from the economy towards till polity, but how they have failed also. So first you will go through the book, children, then the video, go through the entire video. Most of you are not watching the video till the end, which is disappointing. Please do so. You need to know about them, then this knowledge will help you in later as well. So I'll be giving you the question answers very soon. Till then, take care, stay well.